here's what's crazy. I was ketogenic anyways. So it was bacon and eggs for breakfast. It was steak or salmon for dinner. But then it was a big healthy salad for lunch, big salad with bacon and avocado and olive oil and things like that. And then just one day I was too lazy to go get my salad. The next morning, my gums didn't bleed when I flossed, and it hadn't been like that in ages. So I didn't have a salad the next day, and I felt hair on top of my head, and my tinnitus, my ears weren't ringing. The difference between me and optimal health was a salad. Ketogenic diet improved my body composition, or the ease with which I maintain my body composition, and it improved my energy levels. But I did not recover my health until I went carnivore.
Okay, good morning, folks. We have with us today a special guest. Nathan is here to share his stories. Well, good morning. How are you? Where are you located, by the way?
I'm currently in Tyler, Texas.
Texas.
Dallas.
That's where I think Earl Campbell country, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct. The Tyler Rose.
Tyler Rose. That's right. Yeah, awesome. I lived in Texas for a long time. I've been through Tyler, I think, once or so. But anyway, well, welcome. Thank you very much. Well, tell us a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up and what kind of stuff you do? And then kind of, I guess we can get into your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually grew up in Texas. I wasn't born here, but I grew up near here. Went to college, Texas A&M, down the road from UT, which I think you're familiar with.
I won't hold it against you, considering I went to UT, but that's okay, man.
Yeah. I think we'll manage to get along.
You know, I tell you the one nice advantage of going to Texas A&M, when you display the sticker in the back of your window in your car, you get to park in a handicap spot, so you get a closer grocery store spot.
Oh, yeah, okay. It's gotten me out of a couple of tickets, I think. But
there you go. Anyway.
Yeah, good deal. I grew up out here. We're currently touring a little bit of the country in an RV with the family. So I ended up back here visiting family. But anyways, yeah, I joined the military after Texas A&M. Left early due to some things, some medical issues and some financial issues. Joined the Army. Ended up out at Fort Bragg, doing intel work. Left after about 10 or 11 years. I was a pretty decent high school athlete, played high school basketball, good military athlete. You know, the push-up, sit-up, 2-mile run was right down my alley. So I was pretty good at that stuff. Left the military after about 11 years, a lot of time back and forth to Iraq and Afghanistan. Finished up my degree at A&M. And then went and worked for the U.S. government, doing a lot of the same type of work for a few years. And, I've always been active, played ball, ran triathlons, took a couple of MMA fights and things like that. So I always considered myself healthy, spent a lot of time traveling the world and seeing things. So it's been quite an adventure.
Well, what brings you to our community then? Did you have some issues with your health at some point, or what led you here?
I come to find out in hindsight, I was pretty intensely sick. I was very, very insulin resistant, probably pre-diabetic. So I saw you and Dr. Jordan Peterson talking about diet. I've always been, a big advocate of diet. I haven't always adhered, to the things that I probably should have been doing, but I considered myself very healthy. I was just getting older, and you see little signs of age. I think you and I are pretty close to the same age. You're maybe a little bit older than me. So you know the deal. You turn 35, 40, and you think, okay, you're just getting older and you're dealing with these things, and you don't attribute them to anything. And I went ketogenic, I think, after hearing Peter Attia and Tim Ferriss talk about it. And I try to keep an open mind. And I thought, well, these guys aren't selling me anything. They're speaking very highly of it. I'll try it. So I think about 2016, I went keto and was kind of blown away at the ease of maintaining my body composition, the brain fog. I thought I'd developed, adult onset ADHD. I couldn't concentrate the way I had. I saw a pretty significant jump in my health after going keto, and I did that for 2 or 3 years. And then I heard you and Dr. Peterson talking about carnivore, and I figured, well, I was blown away by keto. What do I have to lose? So I tried it for a couple of days. My gums didn't bleed when I flossed, and my radial neuropathy went away, and my hair started growing back, and just all this weird stuff happened. That's probably about 2019. And I adhered pretty strictly to a carnivore diet for the last few years. And then what actually brings me here today, I was standing at a water cooler having a conversation with a guy about 6 months ago, and my hands and feet went numb. And I thought I'd had a stroke. So I thought, okay, I'll get a good night's sleep and I'll see what happens. Like any good, 47-year-old man, I ignored the health signs, and I probably should have gone to the emergency room immediately. But 3 or 4 days later, I found myself unable to control my body. I was weak. I couldn't keep up with people while they were walking. I couldn't buckle my pants. Everything was just it went from tingling to weak to essentially paralyzed. It crawled up my arms and feet. I found myself in the hospital. I think I got to the emergency room by Monday, and I was eventually diagnosed with Guillain-Barre syndrome. And I'm confident that my diet up to that point and then my diet post Guillain-Barre syndrome has been a significant part of my ability to mitigate the damage that it did and then to recover. So probably the biggest part of my story is that, the GBS.
Okay. So for those who don't know, Guillain-Barre is a neurological condition. It often results in weakness, particularly proximally. That's kind of the hallmarks, like, the shoulders, the hips, and things like that. You'd mentioned prior to that you had radial neuropathy. Did I hear that correctly? So you had neuropathy of your radial nerve? Is that what you
Well, it was I self-diagnosed, right? But about 46, mid 40s, I guess early 40s. You get that tingling in your feet where you got to let your feet hang out of the sheets to be comfortable, and you don't really know why. The rest of your body is comfortable, but you could feel tingling. I was starting to get that in my toes and my hands. I would do bench press, and I couldn't bench press heavy because the bar would hurt my hands. It was like a nerve pain. I think I was probably developing something similar to like a carpal tunnel. Anyways, my body, because I was a good athlete and I'm lean and strong and I'm good at certain things, and I looked good in the mirror, I thought I was healthy, but I wasn't. And like I said, in hindsight, once I went carnivore and all these things resolved, I realized how unhealthy I was in hindsight. Radial neuropathy is not something I was ever diagnosed with, but it was clear, little things like my tinnitus went away, all of the things that would be attributed to, say, like the death of the tiny capillaries in your fingers and your ears and your eyes. The reason people who are pre-diabetic or diabetic are losing their toes, losing their eyesight, etc. As you're well aware, this state of chronic hyperinsulinemia has a very negative impact on these tiny capillaries, right? The dementia, the stroke, I think a lot of that is attributed to that chronic hyperinsulinemic state. And I was in that for probably close to 45 years without knowing it. So those little things, like I said, they went away. I mean, at some point, about a week in, my hair started growing back. And I know it sounds crazy, but it's undeniable. You guys know, you can't unsee once you've seen it.
Yeah, let's go back to the Guillain-Barre syndrome. So that's something. Do we have a cause for you? Because it can be sometimes after an infection. Some vaccines have actually been associated with Guillain-Barre. Do we have any idea what might have triggered it? What's that?
My doctors avoided that conversation. I told them I got the vaccine, and I don't know how far you want to go into it here. I don't want to get you cut off of YouTube or whatever, but I got the vaccine that is associated with it in October, because I was working as a government contractor. I was on site with the government. So I had to get it. I didn't want to get it. I got the one that is not the mRNA. And it says right there on the bottle that it's associated with it. Well, my immune system basically went haywire. I never get sick. And from October to about August of last year, or October the year prior to August of this past year, I got sick 3 or 4 times, which was very abnormal for me. And then I came down with Guillain-Barre. And the first thing they asked me when I ended up in the hospital was, have you gotten a flu shot recently, or have you had a viral illness? And I'd had a viral gastrointestinal illness that I couldn't shake. And then I finally got better. And like I said, I was sitting there one day standing at the water fountain having a conversation with a coworker. when it just hit me out of the blue like a lightning bolt. I literally just remember going, oh, my toes and fingers just went numb. And then from there, it was a progressive, as you know, degenerative type thing.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, prior to this, recent, series of COVID vaccines, I mean, people were getting Guillain-Barre associated with flu vaccines and some other ones years and years ago. So that's probably why it's considered, a known, rare side effect of this. So you started getting numbness with in your feet and stuff like that. So how did it progress for you? When did you get diagnosed? How long did it take you to get to a diagnosis?
Sure. So Thursday night is when my hands and feet went, and my fingers basically they went numb. I told myself I get a good night's sleep. I woke up the next morning. I had difficulty buckling my belt buckle. It was numbness, tingling, and a loss of control at first, a loss of fine motor function. By Saturday, when I was walking with my compadres in the hall, I couldn't keep up, and I would make an excuse like, "Oh, hey, let me make a phone call. I'll catch you guys in the cafeteria." We were in a hotel doing an offsite, and I had to make excuses why I couldn't keep up. By Saturday night, I couldn't undress myself. So Sunday morning, we were actually working in Dallas, and I was based in San Antonio at the time. So Sunday morning, I realized if I didn't get home to San Antonio, which is about a 5-hour drive, that I'd end up in the hospital in Dallas, and I might not ever leave it. And I have, 3 little girls. I have a wife. So I left, and I drove from Dallas to San Antonio. And to your point earlier, by this time, my hands and my feet and most of the distal, I guess, is the medical, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
From my shoulders down was weak, and from my hips down, everything was weak, and I could barely feel it. So I spent 5 hours trying to drive, and instead of being able to use my ankles and wrists, I had to use my shoulders and hips. So by the time I got there, I was completely exhausted, right? Because everything was a huge core movement. A 5-hour drive took me about 8. I pulled into the house Sunday afternoon. My wife threw me in the car and took me to the emergency room. They diagnosed me on Monday, and I think on Tuesday evening, they hit me with my IVIG treatment. Okay. So by the time I started IVIG on Tuesday evening, I was essentially fully paralyzed. They were testing my breathing because, as you know, that paralysis hits your diaphragm, and now you're on a respirator or whatever. So it was progressively worse, from tingling in the feet until on Thursday night to essentially full blown paralysis, unable to feed myself, wipe myself, dress myself, or anything by Tuesday afternoon.
So, I mean, did they do a lumbar puncture? How did they diagnose for you?
They did a lumbar puncture. They ended up, the final analysis came back, and it took some time because generally, I guess you have a protein associated with it, right? It's what do you call it? There's not a Guillain-Barre virus that you look at and go, oh, you have Guillain-Barre. It's a list of symptoms, right? Mm-hmm. So it has to be assessed. And then there's a protein associated with it, I guess. They found that, but I also had a high white blood cell count in my lumbar puncture, mm-hmm. Which I guess is unusual. So they called it an unusual case of Guillain-Barre. All my doctors were telling me that the vaccine had nothing to do with it. It was too long ago. Mm-hmm. 7-8 months had passed. Mm-hmm. So I was diagnosed with an abnormal case of Guillain-Barre eventually. But we started the IVIG pretty much immediately because they were worried about it hitting my diaphragm and my ability to breathe.
Yeah, it sounds like you got, quite a severe case if you were, almost fully paralyzed. And it certainly is. There are people that die from Guillain-Barre, and definitely you can have respiratory compromise. And so you had the the immunoglobulin therapy, IV. What happened after that? Did you start resolving your symptoms, or how did that go?
Yeah, they hit me Tuesday night. I was going to have 5 days of treatment. I think basically it was like 1 30-minute long IV for 5 straight days. By Wednesday evening, I felt better, and by Thursday, I had regained function. And by the last day of the 5 days, so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, by Saturday, I felt much better. I describe it as a wave. It was a wave. It went from my toes and fingers to my wrists and elbows and my joints. It came from the edges of my body to the center. And by the end of the 5th day, I could feel it going from the center of my body to my fingers and toes, where it kind of went in order. It was a tingle. It was a loss of sensation. It was a loss of control. It was complete and total weakness and inability to move. So you get the ability to move back, and then you get the sensation back, and then you get the fine control back. And it kind of waved body and then waved out away from my body. Now by Saturday, I felt much better.
So you were hospitalized for, you said like 5 days or something like that in the hospital?
No, I was hospitalized. I was hospitalized for about 2 weeks. So what they told me was,
okay.
here, this is what Guillain-Barre is going to do. You're going to be here as an inpatient through the IVIG, and then we're going to hold you and assess you. And then you're going to spend about 3 months here as an inpatient doing physical therapy to recover your ability to, feed yourself and wipe yourself, etc. And then you'll do 4 to 6 months as an outpatient in therapy to regain your function. Okay. And I have friends who are physical therapists, and that's kind of right along the line. So I was prepared to spend 3 months in the hospital doing physical therapy.
Okay.
Well, I think on Sunday, they send me up to physical therapy. They bill my insurance for 5 days because they bill it in 5-day blocks. By Wednesday, I had essentially fully recovered. I was walking with a walker, then without a walker and a cane, and then without a cane and under my own power. And by Saturday, they were telling me that they didn't know why I was there at all. Mm-hmm. But they had to keep me because they had billed my insurance. I ended up getting a cerebral nerve biopsy, which is down in the calf. It's not a movement nerve. It's not a motor control nerve.
Right. It's cerebral nerve. That's a sensory nerve, right? Yeah.
Sensory nerve, right? Mm-hmm. So they cut me open. They take some nerve. So they keep me in the hospital a couple extra days, but I end up getting discharged on Thursday. They discharged me after telling me I'm going to be in inpatient physical therapy for 3 months. They discharged me on Thursday. I have an outpatient physical therapist appointment on Friday. I go to that, and the doctor says, there's nothing I can do for you. You just go home and take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. So what was supposed to be 4 months of outpatient therapy turned into about 20 minutes.
Why? I'm just curious as to why they did the cerebral nerve biopsy at that stage when you were pretty much sound like you're pretty much recovered at that point. Were they trying to get more of a diagnosis? I mean, it's an extra procedure somebody's got to pay for, right?
They wanted to confirm the diagnosis, because at that point they were still looking at 2 contradictory markers. They were looking at a protein marker that was pointing at Guillain-Barre, mm-hmm. and they were looking at a white blood cell count that was pointing to something else. Mm-hmm. And initially, the doctor I originally had, he was very content to just say, hey, this is what it is and move on. I ended up getting a second neurologist who wanted to do a deeper dive because he couldn't refute the possibility that was some form of sarcoidosis or cancer. Okay. So he ordered the biopsy to confirm. But by the time they did the biopsy, to your point, the nerves, when they got the nerves back and I got the results from the biopsy, it was completely normal. According to the biopsy, there was absolutely nothing wrong with it.
Okay. And then your white count, I mean, you said you had a high white count on your LP, your lumbar puncture, but I mean, did you have does your blood have a high white count in it as well? Because that's often indicative of infection or certainly underlying inflammation. So I guess that resolved too, I assume.
Yeah, nothing. I don't think anything in my blood came back abnormal.
I see. Right? Okay.
So it was just the lumbar puncture. And it, I looked at it, and when I look at it, right, so I'm ordering hospital food and they don't have anything except for eggs and bacon that I can eat on the diet. Right. So I was ordering eggs and bacon for breakfast, lunch, and dinner when my wife wasn't bringing me food from outside, Yeah. So the way I look at it, if you're familiar with if you remember that plane crash with Sully on the river, right?
Oh yeah, is that right? Yeah, okay.
So that ring a bell for some people. He talked about how, he was able to successfully land that plane because every takeoff and landing, you're making a deposit in your experience bank account. Mm-hmm. And then when something goes wrong, you make a significant withdrawal of that experience to save your life. And I looked at the 2 or 3 years that I was carnivore and ketogenic, And all the years I spent lifting weights and running and training and the things that I've done, I looked at those in hindsight as my deposits into my health account. And then when I got hit by GBS, it wasn't that I was impervious to GBS or the impact of GBS, but it allowed me to recover in such a way that it didn't have the impact on me. I know people who are physical therapists who I talk to afterwards, and they they're dealing with people who are 6, 7, 8 months after their diagnosis who do not have enough motor control to control their own wheelchairs. People are still significantly impacted, many months down the road. And I was back to playing with my kids in the front yard, 15, 20 days after it happened.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the stats on Guillain-Barre, I have them in front of me, it says about 40% of the people do not fully recover motor strength. I mean, 40% of people just never recover all their motor strength, and 20% aren't able to walk after 6 months. So it's can be significantly problematic. While you're in hospital eating bacon and eggs every meal, I mean, any comments? Did any people say, why aren't you eating the pancakes and the Jello and all the crap they normally serve you?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. They're beating me up. But it's funny. I had a young PA. I think she was the neurology PA, and I told her, I said, there are a lot of people in my life who believe my crazy diet put me in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And she started laughing. This is like after I had started recovering. We were still trying to just figure out if it was actually Guillain-Barre syndrome. They were making arrangements for my physical therapy, and she laughed. She's probably about 23. She laughed and she says, you're 50 and you look 30.
Mm-hmm.
How anybody could think that your diet got you here is crazy. I'm sure some of your viewers are aware. When I was up on the 3rd floor doing physical therapy, the people around me were 60, 70, 80. They were obese. They were missing feet. They were covered in lesions. And I'd be in the physical therapy sessions with them, and I would hear them bemoaning to their 25, 23-year-old trainers, what could I have done to avoid this? Why did I end up here? It didn't have to be this way. What could I have done? And it was just, it breaks your heart, because as we know, if these people have been doing, these are the results of habits and actions and behaviors. And if you're doing the right behaviors, chances are you're not going to succumb to those kinds of impacts. And it was just really tough to be in physical therapy and listen to people who would rather be out playing with their grandkids, bemoaning their obesity and their missing limbs, when it didn't have to be that way. And the trainers weren't telling them, hey, eat right and exercise. Their trainers were telling them, some people just get unlucky. It is what it is. And it's very, very frustrating.
Yeah, that is one. I mean, you sort of bring up a topic that, you go to the doctor, and if you start asking the question, why do I have this disease? And then almost always you're going to get, what's genetics, it's bad luck, we don't know. I mean, and I think we a lot of times we do know, but or it's knowable, but most people don't look into that. And so somebody wants to put you on an anti-inflammatory medication. You say, hey doc, why am I inflamed in the first place? Well, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. It's just bad luck, and it's not. It's really, there's something going on. Obviously, I'm glad, thankful to hear that you recovered, and it seems like you're completely, I mean, no residual symptoms. You're completely back to normal.
It took about 4 weeks for a little bit of numbness in my toes to go away, but I have more impacts from the serial nerve biopsy than I do.
Well,
from
that's the thing. Yeah, that's the thing I was going to ask, because they do a serial nerve biopsy. You're probably left with some numbness, and I mean, it was probably an unnecessary procedure at that point. I mean, you're already recovered. I mean, why? How's it going to change your management? That's when anybody asks me about a test. Do I need a blood test? Do I need a procedure? It's like, how is it going to change? How is this information going to change my management? And for somebody who's basically recovered and asymptomatic, it's like, why would you put somebody through a procedure? That's my take, and I don't know. Maybe maybe they can justify saying, well, in case it comes back, we'll know what it is. But anyway,
and that's basically what they said. They wanted to confirm the diagnosis.
Yeah.
And I, with the second neurologist, who was a Harvard guy, and, he was very well respected, and everybody on the hospital was telling me how lucky I was to have this neurologist. When he came along and said, hey, let's confirm it's not cancer, right? I did not argue with that. And I don't have any love for the medical field at this point. Looking back in hindsight, I spent 10 years in the Army in special missions. At the height of, I was at special missions unit in Fort Bragg the day that the towers fell. And I spent the next 10 years going back and forth, 90 days on, 180 days off, 22-hour days, shift work all night, working all day, eating. There were deployments where the only thing I had to eat were Skittles and lemon poppy seed, the lemon poppy seed pound cake, right? There were some tough times. I put my body through a lot. And so between the stress and the diet and the just everything I went through, I'm confident that my metabolic health was damaged. And the only thing I was doing well for myself was lifting weights and exercising. Yeah. So I didn't know what I might have been susceptible to. So when he said, hey, it could be a form of cancer, let's confirm it, I decided to go with it. I could have said no. I didn't. And in hindsight, to your point, I probably should have said no to the biopsy because it's the only thing I have left is a scar and some numbness in my toes because he took the nerve that the sensory nerve for the toes.
Yeah. I'm guessing, the central nerve biopsy is not going to, diagnose cancer. It may rule out, Guillain-Barre, but it's not going to diagnose cancer. So when it came back negative, did they say, let's look for cancer some other way? Let's do a MRI scan or some. Where was the mysterious cancer diagnosis when the Guillain-Barre is ruled out? So they stopped looking for it. Sounds like.
Yeah. Well, they ended up. So I went to an outpatient neurologist, right? So the neurologist I had been working with was in the hospital, and then when I went to see my outpatient neurologist, he looked at the biopsy, he looked at all the numbers, he looked at the lumbar puncture and everything, and basically said, "Hey, I'm confident that it was Guillain-Barre. It was an abnormal case of Guillain-Barre, but I'm confident that's what it was." And to his point, he's like, "You're good. You're obviously well recovered, but there is nothing to say that this won't ever come back at some point." And I have to be honest, my immune system, because of that vaccine, I feel like my immune system has been compromised. I was hoping that the Guillain-Barre syndrome, like I said, I got sick 4 or 5 times between the onset of Guillain-Barre and that shot. Mm-hmm. I feel like I was hoping that was going to be the culmination and that I would be done with it after that. But it seems like every time my kids have sniffles or there's something going around, I'm getting it. And I feel like I've become very susceptible. My immune system has been compromised and I'm susceptible to just kind of the regular illnesses here and there that I never really was up until that point.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. And certainly one of these subsequent infections, viral infections or whatever, colds, could have set off the Guillain-Barre as well. And so there's different, there's a whole bunch of different, you don't know type of things. Let me go back to, you went keto, you switched into carnivore after hearing, Jordan Peterson, myself speaking about it. What sort of, prior to the Guillain-Barre diagnosis, what things did you notice? You mentioned you had some sort of vague, kind of numbness went away. What other things did you notice beneficial to you?
Well, obviously the body composition, the inability to get sore. I could work out as hard as I'd ever worked out on a Tuesday, wake up Wednesday and feel like I hadn't worked out at all. Just kind of the ability to go without getting sore. Like I said, my hair, if I started listing everything, my hair started growing back. The redness in my eyes went away. My tinnitus improved. The bumps on the back of my arms and legs went away. The radial neuropathy. The list goes on and on. Like I said, I was obviously intensely sick. I was in the beginning stages of diabetes. It's funny because I met a long lost relative dialed me up. My first cousin once removed, so my father's cousin. I don't know anybody on that side of the family. And he called me up and we got to talking and he said, "Hey, you need to know that in our family, we are prone to dementia, diabetes, and alcoholism." And I thought to myself, well, that sounds familiar, right? Like, I don't think the three of them are unrelated. I know it's probably controversial, but you've heard of how people have a tendency to kick negative habits once they've gone carnivore. I think a lot of that has to do with the dopamine receptors and the idea that alcoholism and sugar addiction are not unrelated in my eyes. That may be controversial as well, but I've seen it, and I know that you've seen it. And I feel like I ended up saving my life. I had a very painful, 40s, 50s, and 60s coming at me, and I did not see it coming. And I think that I avoided it by finding carnivore. And I'm grateful every day that I did. And I'm sure it'll be familiar to people here. When you find it, you feel grateful and you're happy, and it lasts about 30 minutes, and then you get mad because you just can't believe. I've read all the men's healths. I exercised. I was in the gyms. The idea that I was 40 years old and I'd never even heard of the carnivore diet, and I've been lifting weights. I've been doing, quote unquote, all of the right things. And if I would have heard it in my 20s, I would have thought it was crazy. Mm-hmm. And then I do it, and 2 days later, my wife is like, "Hey, I don't know what you're doing, but it's working." It's like, well, and here's what's crazy. I was ketogenic anyways. So it was bacon and eggs for breakfast. It was steak or salmon for dinner, but then it was a big healthy salad for lunch. It was like a Mark Sisson, it was a big salad with bacon and avocado and olive oil and things like that. And then just one day I was too lazy to go get my salad. And the next morning my gums didn't bleed when I flossed, and it hadn't been like that in ages. So I didn't have a salad the next day, and I felt hair on top of my head, and my tinnitus, my ears weren't ringing. And the difference between me and optimal health was a salad. And it sounds crazy to anybody that would be listening, but ketogenic diet improved my body composition, or the ease with which I maintain my body composition, and it improved my energy levels. But I did not recover my health until I went carnivore. And the only difference between me ketogenic and me carnivore was a big salad for lunch.
Yeah, and I continue to hear that same story. People say, well, it's, carnivore only works because you're cutting out processed foods and, so on and so forth. But I'm like, well, I often hear people that already did that. They cut out all the garbage, and all they're doing is removing mostly some vegetables from their diet, and they get better, which is, I think there's something there. It's remarkable. And maybe that's not applicable to everybody, but certainly there's enough people where that occurs that there's something going on here. And, we can talk about, is there some level of toxicity in certain plants that some people are sensitive to? Apparently it seems to be. Now, what does your diet look like today? Now you're how far out? You're about 6 months removed from this Guillain-Barre diagnosis. You haven't changed anything dietary wise, did you? I mean, or where are you at now?
For me, if I eat breakfast, it's bacon and eggs, hamburger meat, steak now and then. We try to go to the Brazilian steakhouse once or twice a month. I got my wife and daughters. We are all basically on the diet. I'm looser with the daughters. They're 4 and 2, and so we give them a lot of raw dairy, things like that. Let them have a little bit of honey on occasion, because they're not sick. They're not starting off,
right, sure.
Metabolically broken.
Right.
But that's kind of where we're at. It's salmon a couple of times a week. I try to make sure that everybody's getting the vitamin D and the calcium that they need. We're adamant about, getting out in the sun and things like that, but it's mostly eggs, meat, steak, a little bit of fish here and there. My wife, we probably go through about a gallon of raw milk every 2 days between my daughters and my wife. I don't do a lot of that. I did open up the aperture. I'd be interested to hear your take on this. I opened up the aperture a little bit afterwards as I left the hospital to put weight on. What I've noticed with my daughters, they go through phases where they eat a lot and they plump up, and then they lengthen and they don't eat a lot. So every 2 to 4 months, they plump up and then they lengthen, and they plump up and they lengthen. And I'm convinced at this point that, the growth, when you look at the requirements of brain development, when you look at the requirements of your immune system and the importance of cholesterol and fat and things like that, saturated fat, animal fats in particular, I used to think of food as going directly into the raw material of the body. But what I think I've seen, and kind of how I've started to live my life, the food goes into the body, and then the body takes from the body to build. right? So you've probably seen a few of the things that they attribute to old age, right? Elderly tend to have higher LDL. It's one of the few things they have in common. So it looks protective. They talk about the bell curve where high LDL at 30, 40, and 50 is bad for you. But at 60, 70, 80, the only thing they have in common is high LDL, right? Cholesterol, LDL, things like that. What I've tried to do is put on a little bit of fluff, right? If you will, call it fluff, I guess, so that my body could use that to regenerate the nerves, right? Because the GBS is essentially the degeneration of the myelin sheath. So I had to rebuild the myelin, and I have to rebuild my cirral nerve because they took 2 inches out of it. And I've allowed myself to put on a little bit of weight because of that, based on my understanding, or at least my observation, that the body builds from itself, and I need a little bit extra to do that. So I have done a little bit more dairy. I've done a little bit of honey, just to give myself something, my body does something to work with. I can walk around. I walk around at 178. I fought MMA at 155. I have veins popping out everywhere. You can't see any body fat. And I'm not convinced that that's necessarily the healthiest, most sustainable way to live. And certainly as I'm trying to recover from this, I probably need a little extra. So I've opened up the aperture on my diet a little bit, but not much. 99.9% is red meat and eggs.
Yeah, just a couple of comments there. So if we look at healthy older people, some of the things they do have in common, yes, you pointed out that many of them do have relatively high LDLs. And some of the thoughts are that, low LDL is associated with disease at that age, cancer, heart disease, so on and so forth. The other thing they tend to be is still very insulin sensitive. So we see people that are insulin sensitive, and they also tend to retain a little bit more lean mass. And so they tend to be a little bit stronger. And so I think those things are all consistent with age from an actual measurement standpoint. What gets you there, how you get there, people can argue about the difference, but being insulin sensitive, retaining lean mass, and then arguably having higher LDL may be protective for and related with longer life. As far as you'd mentioned about, is it healthy long term to walk around shredded at 7% body fat? I don't think there's any studies that would support being that lean provides you any additional benefit beyond a certain point. I mean, there's obesity, which is clearly unhealthy, and then there's sort of normal body weight, and probably people at normal body weight do just as well as somebody that might be leaner. And so there's I think the leanness may confer, like if you're in a weight category sport, obviously when you're fighting in a weight class, being leaner is going to be more helpful. But I mean, just for normal day to day, living, being that lean is probably not going to provide any advantage. You may like the way you look better and that type of stuff, and that's fine too. And the other thing is about, like you said, when you're building yourself up, yeah, I mean, it's often not uncommon to put on a little bit of body fat. I mean, you're in this caloric, surplus situation in order to build lean mass. That's how, it's very difficult to stay super lean and then put on structure, muscle, whatever it is. It sort of can be done, but it's extremely difficult. Some people, utilize drugs to get there, and I'm not a proponent of that. And so, yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, and with kids, I mean, yeah, they're going to fluctuate up and down, and they're in this huge growth phase. You said they're little 2 and 4, so.
Yeah, 2, 4, and 7 months.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. Obviously, if they're getting morbidly, obese, then it's an issue, and I highly doubt that would be the situation eating the type of diet you're describing.
Yeah, I'm sure most people are familiar. I see a lot of kids these days. You see really kind of 2 types of children. You see they're either obese or they're frail, and it's frustrating to see. And my girls eat as much red meat as they can swallow, and you can see their traps and their deltoids, and you're not growing. I'm not trying to make them look a particular way, but they are incredibly strong and dense. They tend to be around the 30 to 50th percentile for length, and they're up in like the 80 and 90th percentile for weight, and it's because they're so dense. They're really heavy. It's made an impact, and we're very happy I'm just very grateful that we found it and found the diet, and I will raise them like that as long as I can control what they eat. I'm sure you've seen the statistics. Something like 80% of all females who play high school sports will tear a ligament of some sort or have major knee injury or whatever. And I don't think you can build bodies out of oatmeal and kale. You certainly can't build them out of cereal. So I'm excited to see where they go as they age and mature. And like I said, I hope to build a base for them that if they do decide to do a different diet as they get older, it won't have as negative an impact as, say, my childhood diet, which was, Pop-Tarts and cereal.
Yeah, I mean, as far as female athletes tearing ligaments, I mean, there's certainly a high percentage of ACL injuries among females, particularly things like soccer and different sports. Yeah, I don't know if it's quite 80%, but it's still higher than men by quite a bit. And we are seeing these numbers increase in pediatric kids. When I started my orthopedic surgery career, it was very rare to see a young kid with an ACL injury, and then it became more and more prominent. And I think, and I'm pretty confident that the poor quality diet leads to worsening tissue integrity and therefore more easy to tear. And it doesn't help that kids are becoming more and more obese, and then they have decreasing strength to weight ratios, and so now they're bigger but they're weaker. And so, they're able to tear things more likely. It's not that the kids are more active or more athletic these days than they were 20 years ago. In fact, they're probably more sedentary, but we're seeing higher rates of injuries. I saw some kids, these obese little girls, 10, 15, 12, 14-year-old girls tearing their ACL, which is unfortunate because they just didn't have much, they had a lot of adipose tissue, not enough muscle to go with it, unfortunately. Yeah, but I think as far as the kids go, yeah, if you start teaching them early about nutrition, that it's important. Like my parents never talked to me about nutrition. I had no idea. I mean, they just fed me, and I had no concept about what
Sure.
nutrition meant. I didn't learn that until later on in life. But I started my kids, teaching them early and say, hey, nutrition matters, and this is why we don't eat a bunch of sugary junk all the time. This is why we want to make sure we get plenty of protein and plenty of high quality meat and eggs and things like that. And I think if you ground them with that, you're going to give them such an advantage over their peers because their peers are growing up, probably like I did, just thinking, convenience food, tastes good, it's cheap. Can't wait till I can afford my own food. I'm just going to buy all the junk in the world and live on takeout food and garbage. And yeah, that's a quick route towards obesity for many, for mental health disorders for others, for metabolic disease for others, and it is a shame. But good on you for it's kind of interesting because you said you hadn't heard about the carnivore diet several years ago, and I'm trying my best, man. I'm telling you, I'm trying to get the message out there, and the rest of us are doing it too. So we just have to, because we're not hearing it from our government is not telling people that we need to cut back on eating processed food in any realistic way. I mean, they kind of vaguely hint at it, but they should just come out there and say. I mean, I think, maybe you don't ban the stuff, but you put a warning label on it, just like you do cigarettes, and say, hey, this stuff's been associated with whatever, disease, cancer, on, and maybe somebody get the message. But
Yeah.
we're happy to demonize red meat and all this stuff, and it's a shame. It really is. So you are in Texas full time? You said you're traveling around in an RV right now, but I mean, you're not in the RV right now, are you? You don't look like it.
I am in the RV right now. I had to, if I want peace and quiet, I have to kick the family out of here. So family is actually hanging out with my mom right now.
I see.
Yeah.
So
I was on site as a government contractor. I was an owner in a government contracting company, and I was on site doing some training for the government. And I've started doing some coaching myself.
Mm-hmm.
I have friends who have just kind of been taken aback by my circumstances. I've always been athletic. I've always been, I got my personal training certificate at one point as a young man, just for shites and giggles, just because I enjoy it. I've always been in the gym and I've stayed there. But so I'm doing some of that online and working with some people I'm in Texas now. We'll probably be in Texas for the foreseeable future, probably winter here. And then I'd like to get the girls out, see some of the country. There's a lot of places overseas that I've seen that I didn't care to be, and a lot of places in America I'd love to see, and I've never been. So we're going to get out this summer and tool around a little bit.
Yeah, fair enough. When I went to Afghanistan, it was never on my bucket list. I'd never said, "Oh, I want to go to Afghanistan someday." But you know, it was interesting. I don't know where you were. I was at Bagram, and it was, you know, I mean, you look at the background. There's the Hindu Kush Mountains. It's really beautiful to look at, but there's, you know, landmines and people trying to shoot at you all the time. So, you know, it's kind of a shame. You know, it could be like a beautiful ski resort, quite honestly, but instead it's
Well, and
you know,
there's time there. It was back in the I think it was back in like the 60s and 70s. Afghanistan was well known as a destination for hippies going out to
interesting.
probably smoke weed and
Yeah,
ski. You know,
yeah,
I was in Kandahar and and
tremendous.
Bagram.
Yeah.
I hit basically every spot in Iraq. I did some work with the government, with the agency in Turkey and Syria and Jordan. So I've been to all the garden spots, and I've done a lot of cool things. And it's frustrating as I look back. Yeah, I always put in the work in the gym, but I definitely wasn't operating at my peak performance
Yeah.
for a long time. I look back and think, you know, the fatigue, the mental fatigue, the inability to focus, the soreness, the age-related kind of lethargy, whatever it was, you know. It would have been nice to have known about this when I was trying to make the basketball team when I was 15 years old and put on some muscle. You know, it's frustrating. You feel like I gave away a lot.
Yeah, I just wonder if you know, if the military, we decide, hey, we're going to feed our war fighters meat, you know, and make them, put them on a heavily carnivorous diet. You know, I think that would make a huge difference. I mean, because already right now we have significant issues with everybody on profiles because they can't exercise because they're getting fat. You know, it's crazy. You go to the military and all these guys are on profiles because they can't run 2 miles, or they, you know, they have all
Yeah.
these aches and pains and they're 26 years old, and it's like, you got to be kidding me, man. Do you participate in social media at all? Is this something you do, or you kind of stay away from that stuff?
Well, only recently, right? I've been. What did Dick Cheney said something about, you know, fighting wars in the shadows. I've spent the last 20 years in the shadows. The GBS incident, they had stood up a GoFundMe. Some of my friends, and so the word kind of got out there, and so that's when I decided to do some coaching and things. So yeah, I'm now on social media. I have a little coaching thing where I try to take a lot of the lessons and things that I've learned in the military because of where I was at, and in the government service. I was around a lot of high achievers. They do invest in us a lot. I have some things I think that can help people on top of the fitness aspect and the dietary aspect. So yeah, I just started up an Instagram account. I'll be starting up a YouTube soon. If anybody's looking for me, they can find me at Trapex. It's TRAPEX.biz. That's the website, and you can find all my stuff from there. I'm also on Instagram. If you see something, it'll say The Point by Trapex. I studied philosophy in college. And to your point, you know, the government's not always telling you the truth about things as far as like diet, etc. There's a lot of things that we're not being told the truth about. And it's not about being smart, but if you can learn philosophically to think well, you can at least see these arguments that are being used to manipulate and influence us. And the better we think, and it's always, you know, it's on us to be diligent about it. But again, you know, not depending on how smart you are, but how well you think and how critically you are capable of thinking, you can start to see the truth if you're looking for it. And if you're not looking for the truth, you're not going to find it even when you see it, if you do happen to bump into it. So that's kind of my focus. My social media, it's how do you read these articles? How do you read these studies? How can you tell if you're being lied to? And then my consulting is how do you know, we all kind of have the same goals. We all want to be happy. We all want to be healthy. We all want to be fit. How do you build the daily habits to get there? Right. So lifestyle design puts you on a path to get where you want to be. And that's what my focus is with Trapex.
Well, good luck with that. And again, once again, I appreciate you coming in here and sharing your experience, your story. Thank you for your service in the military, of course, and enjoy your time in Texas. You know, enjoy the family, and it goes by quick for sure. All right.
Yeah.
Well, For the rest of the
I'm
folks,
honored, Shawn. Thank you.
I'm going to be out of town for a couple of days. I've got to fly to Maui tomorrow, so I've got to meet with an investor. I've got some obligations with some investors, and so I've got to go meet tomorrow in Hawaii, and so I'll be back on, well, actually Monday, so I'm gone for a couple of days. So thank you very much. You guys have a great day, and we'll talk to everybody later. Bye-bye now. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you.